Well, thank you, General Sullivan, for that kind introduction. You sort of paved the way for some of the things I'm going to be talking about, but there's also someone I want to introduce, and I have a new battle buddy who did a change of command last week, Lieutenant General Halverson. So he's going to be dual-hatted as the AXIM and the IMCOM commander, splitting his time between here and San Antonio, running the installation business. And that's one thing I'm going to be talking about is really the installation business. BRAC, and I know some think of it as a four-letter word, and it sort of is to some, but it really is a good thing for the Army, and that's what I want to talk about. Next slide. And there. So during the hearings before Congress this year, both the Secretary of the Army, John McHugh, and General Odierno highlighted some of our challenges. And so one of the challenges is that we've absorbed a lot of budget cuts. Especially 13 was pretty difficult. We have a little bit of relief in 14 and 15, but then when we get to 16, that's about a 20 billion cut from what we put in our POM, President's Budget 14. So that's a significant cut for us. And so we are going to have to reduce our end strength further. So as we work to reduce it as fast as we can while keeping operational readiness, it really puts us in a difficult bind because right now end strength is about 52% of our budget. And so when we speak of hollowness and a hollow force, I sort of think of Swiss cheese. You know, there's a lot of empty space there. You don't get a whole lot of cheese and you've got holes in it. I know that's not what hollowness means, but a hollow force refers to military forces that appear mission ready, but upon examination suffer from shortages in personnel, in equipment, and deficiencies in training. So I relate Swiss cheese to the status of Army installations. Next slide. And when General Sullivan talked about a sinusoidal wave pattern, this is our end strength. And so if you think about it, in World War II, 8.3 million. And we built structures and we built facilities and we built what we needed to support the training for a force of that size. And so you can see periodic conflicts, and then you get down to where we were at the peak in Afghanistan, which is 562,000. And we're committed to get down to 490 by 2015. The QDR says, and then 450 by 2017. And the budget reality is that we may have to get down to 420,000. So you can see that last black line is 500,000. If we get down to 420,000, we haven't been significantly below 500,000 since before World War II. So we're going to have an incredibly small army with a whole lot of responsibility. Next slide. So as we look at our force structure, we did a capacity analysis. How much property, how much real estate do we need to support an army of 490,000? And so when we did that capacity analysis, it showed us we're going to have 18% excess infrastructure. So then you think of, well, what about an army of 450? Or what about an army of 420? We're going to have a lot of excess infrastructure. And so when you look at underutilized facilities, the cost to maintain facilities is about $3 a square foot. And so that empty space tax, just calculated at an army of 490,000, is about $500 million a year, $500 million. That's just operating those facilities. Then you've got sustainment, then you've got gate guards, and then you've got everything else surrounding keeping an installation open and it's upwards of $500 million. So every time we look at force restructuring and to start the process of stationing actions, next slide, we need to do a programmatic environmental assessment. And so the installations that you see here on the left side are the installations we assessed in a programmatic environmental analysis in 2013 for the drawdown to 490,000. And we announced those stationing actions. But when we look at an Army of potentially 420,000, the cuts and the locations that those cuts will take are much broader. So early this year, we issued a programmatic environmental analysis, and we're in the process of taking much deeper cuts in our force structure. Now, if you add all this up, these cuts are much more than what is needed to get to an Army of 420,000. But when we look at it, we're going to have to take these deeper cuts. We did the easy ones to get to 490,000. So we're collecting the data, and when we get to probably about this summer, we're going to have preliminary analysis, and we'll start having listening sessions at each of the installations to get input from the locals to see if we've appropriately analyzed all of the factors. And then we're going to have to put it all together and look at how we're going to get to an Army of 420,000. You can imagine there's going to be a bit of a noise generated this summer as we go out to the communities and talk about the kind of impact this could have. Next slide. So, one way for us to optimize our infrastructure is base realignment and closure. We consolidate into that Swiss cheese. One installation might have a whole lot of empty warehouses, another might have empty barracks, a third might have office buildings. And when you do that consolidation analysis, you fit people, you fit units, you fit the stationing actions to fit to your real estate so that you don't maintain empty, hollow, half-full installations, and then you return excess infrastructure to the community. So if we don't have that BRAC analysis, the question is, what do we do if we don't have that authority? We looked at the things that we can do. Military personnel. With a reduced budget, we're going to shrink the military. We're already doing that. Modernization, we've already taken cuts in modernization. Research and development, we're already taking cuts in research and development. Those are already locked into our plan. Now you look at things we've tried to take cuts in compensation and benefits, and that's a hard row. That's very difficult, and Congress is not supporting us in that. Medical costs, we tried to take some reductions in that, and that's another one that's very difficult. So civilian personnel, to really optimize reductions in civilian personnel, and the installation community has upwards of 40,000 civilians in it, we really need BRAC. And to optimize our installation infrastructure, we really need a BRAC because we can't do it otherwise. And unfortunately, when you look at our budget items, in training and readiness, that's the easiest place to get dollars. So when we talk about a hollow force, we're going to have people there, but they're not going to be trained, and they're not going to be ready to fight. And as Secretary McHugh said, the money's gone. It's already gone. A BRAC enables us to live within the budgets that we have been given by Congress. So the next question we get is, so tell me, what is a BRAC? And so when I was testifying on the Hill, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that's one of the things Senator Shaheen said, is she said, 50% of the senators here weren't around for the last BRAC. You're going to have to do some coaching and teaching and explain to them what it is. And it really is a statutory process that was established by Congress to do base realignment, to do closures in a thoughtful and analytic, open and transparent manner. It's a fair process. It opens up the military value of each installation. We look at capacity analysis. We show everybody that information, and then we put together a series of recommendations that goes to a commission. Then it's voted on. It's voted on in a lump sum, in a package, so that you can't pick it apart, and it reduces the amount of political influence. But as Secretary Hagel said, we do have some non-BRAC authorities. Next slide. And so this is 2687. Section 2687 gives us directions on these non-BRAC authorities. It defines study requirements. It defines what must be analyzed, and then it requires us to put it in our budget submittal. And that's one thing I told Congress. I said, you didn't see any closures in our fiscal year 15 budget request. But if we do not get BRAC authorization for BRAC 2017, you might see it in our fiscal year 16 budget request. And 2687 is not an open and transparent process. It's where we have a very small team that behind closed doors puts together an analysis based upon our best judgment of what we think we should close to optimize our facilities. And then we put it in a budget with an announcement that these are the ones we're going to close. And unfortunately, it then generates a whole lot more angst in that community than a BRAC process, which is a realignment. It does not give you some of the authorities that are available in BRAC, because we close the basin, we auction it off to the highest bidder. Under BRAC, the community is involved and a local reuse authority is involved. Let's go to the next slide. The BRAC process is a very linear process: capacity analysis, certifying data, developing recommendations based upon 20-year force structure, an independent commission that is established jointly by Congress and the President that reviews all of the analysis. The independent commission reviews for consistency. The communities have an opportunity to come and testify before the commission on various actions. It is a very rigorous process, very open and transparent process. And when we followed this in BRAC 2005, about half of the recommendations that the services put forward were approved by the commission and went forward as part of BRAC 2005. Next slide. So one of the other questions we get is, well, you don't get savings from a BRAC. And that's just patently wrong. We do get savings. The 4 prior BRAC rounds from 88 to 95 are saving us annually about $1 billion together. And that's real savings from not having to operate installations that we don't really need, that are excess to current needs. About a 2.2-year payback period, and that's pretty decent. And then you look at BRAC 2005. Now, BRAC 2005 was different. In BRAC 2005, part of it was restationing, bringing units back from Europe. 2 brigade combat teams. See, in Europe, we had infrastructure to support them, subsidized by the Germans. We had people working on those installations, subsidized by the Germans. We paid utilities there, subsidized by the Germans. But when we brought them back to the United States, we had to build new infrastructure, manned by U.S. citizens, all costs paid by U.S. citizens. And that was the transformation part of the BRAC. And many of the items that were put forward to the commission had no return on investment. We knew it was going to increase our cost. So when you break it apart and you look at just the efficiency portion, on the efficiency portion, the Army spent about $2 billion, and we're getting $575 million in savings a year. That's about a 3.4-year return on investment. Still, from a business standpoint, that's smart. But you look at the other part of it, the transformation part, And that cost us $11 billion, saving about $400 million a year, less than the efficiency part, and has a payback period greater than 30 years. And that's because if you look at those group of recommendations, many had no return or a negative return on investment. So when we talk about our need for a new round of BRAC, we need an efficiency BRAC, just like those prior BRAC rounds. We're not talking about bringing units back from Korea. We're not talking about bringing units back from Europe. We're talking about closing installations, which is what these prior BRAC rounds were. Next slide. So one of the things Congress said, two things they said last year. They said, first of all, you haven't done a capacity analysis. So when I went up to the Hill this year, I said, we have done a capacity analysis. At an Army of 490,000, we're going to have excess capacity of 18%. The second thing they said is, well, you haven't optimized your infrastructure overseas. So they asked OSD to lead a European infrastructure consolidation process, which is taking a look at all of the services and federal agencies that are in Europe and seeing how we can consolidate our real estate there. So when the Army did our analysis, we have 10 to 15% excess capacity in Europe. Much of which is part of a plan that has already been in place since 2006 or earlier to consolidate our real estate, because I don't have to go to Congress. General Halverson and I don't have to go to Congress to close installations in Europe. We have to go to OSD, and that's a whole nother issue. But since 2006, we've reduced our fort structure 45% in Europe, and our infrastructure upwards of 50%. Smart business decisions, doing the right thing. We're doing the same thing in Korea. We're moving down further south on the peninsula to Camp Humphreys and Daegu, moving out of some of the higher cost areas along the DMZ, returning land to the Koreans. This is something that we are good at, and it is saving money. So Congress asked us to do two things. They asked us to look at our infrastructure in Europe, been there, done that, have the recommendations in hand. The report goes to Congress this summer. They asked us to do a capacity analysis. We did that, high-level capacity analysis. We have excess capacity. We are taking care of Europe. We are taking care of Korea. And we still need a BRAC. Next slide. So one of the things I mentioned is there are community benefits from BRAC. And it was very interesting because a member of Congress in one of the hearings sort of slipped up. And he said, you know, on things that were closed outside of BRAC, why don't you give them the same liability coverage that you do under BRAC? And I said, sir, thank you for recognizing the benefits of BRAC. He goes, I didn't say that. I said, well, to me, it sounds like you did. And under BRAC, yes, there's additional liability coverage. There's additional benefits to the community. Because as I said, we don't auction off the land to the highest bidder. We work with the community, because the community might say, we really want this to be an industrial park. We don't want it auctioned off to the highest bidder. We want to put together a strategic plan on how to transform our community. We work in close concert with them. It gives the community control over property reuse. It gives them some liability coverage. It helps with some of the environmental. It gives them the ability to thoughtfully develop, master plan, and balance their interests. And so the status quo, if we don't have a BRAC, means you're going to have empty installations. You're going to have soldiers that have moved out of the community. The community has no opportunity to reuse or put those empty buildings back into the taxpayer base. And it's a drain on our funds. It's a drain on our budgets. Under BRAC, they have a chance to recuperate from the loss in DoD jobs, get the property back into the tax base, and create jobs. BRAC is a good thing. It's a benefit to the community. It's a benefit to the Army. Next slide. So, how you can help. We need your support. As the Association of the U.S. Army, We need you to be advocates for us to help us do the right thing. Now, before I took this job, I was in industrial manufacturing. And one of the things I know is with the technology that you have in industrial manufacturing, you can make more items in less square footage. That's some of the things technology has done for us. We have excess capacity in the industrial base. I get asked, what about surge? We can meet it. We have huge excess capacity in our industrial base, and with fewer soldiers, we're going to have excess capacity on our FORSCOM installations, on our TRADOC installations. So we need your support to recognize that when we have savings in infrastructure, that's money that we can put into modernization. We can help invest in training. We can help invest in equipping. Because otherwise, everyone's budget is drained unnecessarily. And as the Secretary of the Army said, the money is gone. The budgets are shrunk. And it's a question of how do we live within our current budgets. Something the private sector does all the time, by the way. You go bankrupt otherwise. With us, the money is gone, and we're trying to spread it more thinly across installations that we really don't need. Now, the question gets asked, what happens if surge? What happens if there's another conflict? In our industrial base, you go to multiple shifts. You can make a huge amount of more ammunition or munitions out of the industrial base if we consolidate and optimize it. We have that capacity. We have the capacity to surge on our installations. We can double up in our barracks. We have a lot of barracks and training space and mobilization space in our reserve and guard components. So we have the capacity for surge. We still have 18% excess capacity. So I want to thank you for, as General Sullivan said, writing your congressman. We need your support. We need you to be advocates for another round of BRAC because you know it will help benefit the Army. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Great.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, thank you for coming to talk to us today. You're not mandated to do so. Your salary doesn't go up or down. It takes a couple hours, including travel time, and it takes a couple days to prepare for this. So thank you very much. It means you're not doing something else, which is probably sleeping. We do appreciate it. My question has nothing to do with your talk, so I apologize. This is something of an ambush question, and so you may pass if you wish. 2 days ago, I heard from Lieutenant General Mason about something called the Base Camp Integration Laboratory at Fort Devens. And yesterday, I looked on the information superhighway, and the first thing that comes up is your photograph. If you're willing, and it is an ambush question, would you tell us a little bit about what is the Base Camp Integration Laboratory and how it is going to impact the future United States Army? Thank you.
I can do that, sure. That's not quite an ambush. If my picture was there, I'd probably have been there many a time. I'm up there twice a year. Base Camp Systems Integration Lab is a closed Army base. It's now used by the National Guard. And we have set up 2 camps there, each 150-man camps, using our force provider, which is essentially a fob in a box. The force provider, one is our current configuration, and the other is where we're testing innovation from the private sector. And that can be generators, microgrids, insulated tents, solar shades, water systems, different cooking systems, even some hard stand collapsible systems, to see if we can really operate them. We run them through the paces, setting them up, taking them down multiple times. How much energy do they consume? How much water do they consume? What is the weight? Are they transportable? Can you rock and roll them? And then National Guard units come in and train and use them, and then we survey them. How does it work? What did you think about it, et cetera? And so we've been able to really refine the force provider set. So one of them is a hard stand. It's more durable, it's more resilient, and if you look at what we're doing in Afghanistan, it gives you better quarters in a rustic atmosphere. So last time I was in Afghanistan, we went over and saw one being set up, and you have 8 soldiers who can set up a 150-man camp in about 2 days and be operational. And one of the concerns we have right now is when you set up a base camp in a kinetic atmosphere, having everyone having to work on it, can you protect yourself from your surroundings? And we get into some very difficult situations. So by being able to set it up very quickly, by being able to support yourself, getting a talk set up very quickly, and using less energy and using less water means it's more sustainable and more supportable. So that's something that my team is working on, an operational energy and contingency basing strategy, along with the G4, on how we can optimize base camp. So that's really what the Base Camp System Integration Lab is.
First class.
Thank you. Certainly. And actually, Modern Marvels came out and did a filming on what we do there. So periodically on the History Channel, you'll see me, and they're still running it. I did that 2 years ago, so it's sort of a fun thing.
Ray Dubois, CSIS. Thank you very much, Catherine. That was an excellent presentation on BRAC. As many of you know, I have some scars with respect to BRAC, the mother of all BRACs. How does the NDAA prohibition on appropriated funds being spent on planning for BRAC impact Section 2687 and the Secretary's statutory authorities under that section? I don't quite, it seems like it's in conflict, but is it?
Well, we really dove into that question when Congress said you haven't done a capacity analysis, and doing a thorough capacity analysis is preparation for a BRAC. So we sort of skirted the boundaries on that one by doing a high-level capacity analysis, which was taking a look at the real property book that the Army has, and taking a look at the needs of a force of 490,000. And we have calculations or requirements in the Uniform Facility Criteria as to how much space you need for certain activities. And so it was a mathematical exercise to determine we had 18% excess capacity. 2687 is not grounded on the same requirements for a BRAC. That is strictly how to close a base. And it was interesting because Congress asked GAO to do a report on does the Department of Defense have authority to close bases outside of BRAC? And they published it in May of 2013, and the answer is yes, 2687. So if we follow the directions in 2687, I won't say it's easy. It's very difficult. It costs us more than doing the analysis in a BRAC, but if that's the only authority we have, then we're going to use it. And that's what Secretary Hagel said, and that's what the services are all looking at, is how we can close bases and what we should close using the 2687 authority. So that NDAA language does not prohibit us from exercising 2687 authority.
I've got one. Madam Secretary, can you, the numbers you showed in parentheses.
Do you want to go there?
First of all, is that a 490 number?
No, that's a 420.
It's the 420 number.
Yep.
Okay, what are those numbers in parentheses? What does that represent?
That's the number of uniformed military that could be riffed from that location.
It's the maximum population be assessed in the supplement to the program. So
Because of, because of,
going below 490.
Yeah, if we go below 490, where are we going to take it from?
okay, that's, okay, so you're estimating that that's where they'll.
If we have to, and what was interesting is in the programmatic environmental assessment we did to get to a force of 490,000, we didn't look at cuts deep enough to give us the analysis to get to a force of 420. So it's a supplemental PEA. It's an addendum to the PEA we did in 2013. And any one of these locations could take cuts this deep. I'm not saying they all will, but they could. And that's what we're analyzing is the impact should a cut of this magnitude be taken at that location.
Yeah, okay, at some point, though, doesn't the need for land for expansion enter into the equation?
When we
I
do...
mean, you talk surge, industrial surge, at some point, unless the world changes significantly, which it doesn't appear to be going in the right direction at the moment, we will have need for places to train troops. How precise do you get these numbers?
When we do a military value analysis, we rank the bases on a wide range of criteria. For an instance,
okay, so
when
this is not that.
That is not that. The first stage...
This is not in some
rank order, no.
rank order.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
It's supposed to be alphabetic. But when we did the analysis in Europe, and we did the military value analysis for our bases in Europe, as those who've been over there, Grafenwehr and Baumholder came up high. Why? Large training areas. So when we do a military value analysis for the United States under a BRAC, those bases that have large training ranges will probably be high, rank high as military value. So military value is part of the analysis. Another part of the analysis is infrastructure that's existing to be used. Because one of the factors when we looked at our last set of stationing actions to go to 490,000, and there are some moves that are part of that, is none of the moves could require MILCON. So when we looked at the different scenarios on collapsing to a force of 490,000, we wanted to collapse into our best infrastructure, the places that had the best training areas, where we could have maximum value. When we get to this, we're going to have to do the same as part of stationing, and the challenge is if we do these kind of stationing actions and do not have BRAC authority, we're going to have huge holes. Some of them could be of this magnitude. We're not going to be able to do what we did in the last stationing actions. When we get down to 490, the installation that took the biggest hit was Fort Knox, losing about 50% of their military population. The rest of the installations, they didn't take anything that they couldn't absorb, but we still have holes.
Any other questions? I think that's all we have for you. Thank you again very much.